1769, and Joseph Knight, along with his master John Wedderburn, has just landed on the beaches here in Scotland. Knight, a black slave from Jamaica, was in a very ailing world, but his bravery is what shook Scotland into a free fall of monumental change. Hi, I'm Michael, I'm a proud Scot and I'm a resident to one of the most historical countries in the world. Scotland's past is very rich and most of this can be attributed to our fight for our freedom from our much larger neighbours England. This act of defiance is something for which Scotland's past is much celebrated by historians and the general public in Scotland, even having famous films made about us such as Braveheart, Outlander, the TV series, and Netflix's new series Outlaw King. However, I'm going to be exploring Scotland's darker past and history, something which is not as widely known or taught within schools in Scotland, and that is what I will be trying to uncover in this series. I'm on the train here, and so firstly, to investigate Scotland's darker past, I will firstly be travelling to Glasgow. I'm quite eager and also a bit anxious to see what I'll find, so here we go. So I have travelled to Glasgow today. We're walking through the city streets, and Glasgow is a very modern city in Scotland. It's also a city brimming with history, and Glasgow is especially famed for being a huge trading city with the River Clyde running through it and eventually opening up onto the Atlantic Ocean. So it was a hub for transporting goods all over Scotland. So as I walk through the streets of Glasgow, you can tell it was a city which was once overflowing with wealth, which you can see from the architecture and the detail in the buildings and stuff like that. However, as I do turn down the different streets and stuff like that, take a different walk around, there is actually a darker secret to Glasgow. One which I was not taught in schools in Scotland, and also by organisations such as the BBC. So if you stick around, I will be showing you what I mean. So this is the Museum of Modern Art in Glasgow, and as you can see, it's a massive grand building. It was a very expensive building to make, and it cost £10,000 back in the 18th century, which in today's money is around £900,000, which is a lot of money to build a house. But this house was owned by William Cunningham, who was actually famously a tobacco merchant and slave owner who profited from the transatlantic trade in the 18th century, so it was really off of the back of him owning slaves. However, when I dug deeper into Glasgow's history, it wasn't just William Cunningham that owned and profited from the slave trade. It was also others who helped shape Glasgow. In fact, many of the street names are named after rich slavers that built the town off the back of slavery, such as Glassford, Ingram, Buchanan and Dunlop. These men all helped create Glasgow off of the back of slavery. Personally, I'm extremely shocked to learn of our involvement in this trade, since Scotland has always been portrayed as this sort of rosy liberal country. However, I'm more shocked about the way in which nobody has actually ever talked about it, at least in schools, or how it came to be that our largest city, Glasgow, was started in construction upon their backs without mention upon their name on what they did or anything like that. However, and unfortunately, it's not just Glasgow that is scathed with this history. So I'm on the train taking a journey to the capital of Scotland, Edinburgh, to try and uncover more dark secrets and the past, and shows a bigger insight. So just stick with, and I'll meet you there. I'm here at St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh. Edinburgh is the capital city of Scotland. It's a very famous city. It's famed for having the huge castle on the extinct volcano here, and it also is the market town of Scotland a long time ago. We're stood in St Andrew's Square. As you can see behind me, the huge pillar with the man on top. If you just want to pan up for me. Thank you, cameraman. So behind me you can see there's a huge statue of a man on there. And now, because we are situated in St Andrew's Square, I did ask a few people in the square who are walking about here earlier who they thought the man on top of the statue was, and a lot of people will tell you it's St Andrew, who was the patron saint of Scotland, who's a very famous person in Scottish history, and also is the reason for our blue and white flag. However, the man on top of the statue isn't actually St Andrew himself. It's actually a man called Henry Dundas. Now, Henry Dundas was a very famous man and a huge figure in political Scotland. So at the time, and around the 18th century, Scotland was bound, or is still bound, by the Union of the United Kingdom, but didn't have as many MPs down in Westminster who could fight for Scotland's corner. So he is famous due to the fact that he fought for Scotland in Westminster as an MP, and because of this he got a few titles. In London he was known as the Dictator, and in Scotland he was known as the Uncrowned King of Scotland. Okay, so it's a huge honour to have a monument dedicated to you in the city centre of Edinburgh, due to it being such a famous city. However, Henry Dundas actually has a darker secret which has been untold in history. This secret is the fact that he actually had strong ties to the East Indies Trading Company, which was the company very strongly linked to the trade slave in Jamaica and the West Indies. And he was actually the main man when the abolition of slavery was being voted through. He was the main person actually opposing the vote for the abolition of slavery. Now, this is maybe partly due to the fact that he had strong ties with David Wedderburn and also ties in the East Indies Company. So one of my main questions is, if a man such as Henry Dundas has opposed the abolition of slavery, why is it that he's actually got this massive monument dedicated to him in Edinburgh? Now, I know that he fought for the rights of the Scottish people, but what makes you Scottish? At the end of the day, Scottishness isn't defined by a certain way you look or the way you act. Scottishness is defined by where you are born and the country of nationality that you take to. So if Henry Dundas stops advocating for a being who is a person of colour, even though they are Scottish, does this make him an advocate for the people of Scotland? In my view, I beg to differ. Now, what frustrates me more now is that Scotland, as the egalitarian country we perceive to be and want to be, why is it now that we are not teaching people in Scotland of our involvement in the slave trade and what happened to these people? Now, this board here, located outside St Andrew's Square, is actually a really good thing, because I didn't actually notice this until I left the square, but on top you can see this sticker covers Henry Dundas and it says "All bigots must fall." Now, I'm not saying defacing public property is good in any way, it's not. However, it is interesting to think that a few more people are trying to raise the issue now than we may have realised. However, I'm on the train home just to recap, and then later on bring more of my research findings to you. I'm also going to investigate into a man called David Wedderburn, who Henry Dundas had strong ties to when voting against the abolition of slavery. And I've travelled to Blackness Castle today, 5 minutes away from my house in Lithgow, to find out more about John Wedderburn and his involvement in the slave industry at Blackness Castle. So as you can see, I'm stood outside the entrance to Blackness Castle, and from what you can tell, the Wedderburn family, who owned the castle from the 16th century to the 18th century, were in fact an extremely wealthy family. So when John Wedderburn was a young man, he decided that he wanted to increase his wealth and his career, so he decided to travel to the island of Jamaica, which was seized by the British colony from Spain. There he became a medical doctor for a wee while until he managed to build up enough money to join into the slave organisation. Within Jamaica, John Wedderburn became 10% landowner of all of the land in Jamaica, making him one of the most profitable sugar plantation owners on the island and in the British Empire. He transported sugar all across the empire, predominantly to the British Isles, and also had many slaves which he owned, which he also transported across the world. Because of John Wedderburn's massive wealth from the company that he owned in Jamaica, he tried to get his whole family to get involved in the organisation, which was a huge step for him. From this, he was instrumental in the creation of the East Indies Trading Company, which traded many products such as silk, cotton, sugar, tobacco and other things across the world. So why do we need to know this? Well, it all comes down to an event that happened between slaver and slave. In John Wedderburn's later life, he eventually decided that he wished to return to Scotland. Now, being a man who had accumulated enormous wealth because of his plantations in Jamaica and other countries, he decided that he would build himself a few houses which he stayed in, and he also decided that he would bring a couple of slaves over from his country in Jamaica, and one of these was a man called Joseph Knight. Now, the Joseph Knight case is a massive step towards the abolition of slavery in the UK, and his fight to become a free man within the UK is a massive step forward towards this. Joseph Knight decided that when he became a slave within Scotland, transported to this country from Jamaica, he decided that he would read up on the law. Joseph Knight decided he would take a very bold move and would become a free man on his own accord. He'd started packing his bags within John Wedderburn's house and decided that he would leave the premises. When John Wedderburn saw this, he was outraged and decided that he would contact the local magistrate and get Joseph Knight thrown into Perth jail, which he eventually did. Once Joseph Knight had been thrown in jail, he brought a claim before the Justices of Peace Court in Perth, which would be a case known as Knight versus Wedderburn, and it would be known all across Scotland. John Wedderburn argued that because he had in fact transported Joseph Knight from Jamaica, which cost him a lot of money, and also additionally educated him in mathematics and English, that he had some sort of control over Joseph Knight. Because John Wedderburn argued this, he had a strong starting case for the case against Joseph Knight. However, the case started to turn and go in favour of Joseph Knight, and this is because the sheriff at the time ruled that, and I have a small segment here which quotes, "The state of slavery is not recognised by the laws of this kingdom, and is inconsistent with the principles thereof, that the regulations in Jamaica concerning slaves do not extend to this kingdom." Because of this turn of events, David Wedderburn actually lost the case here to Joseph Knight's delight, and he became a free man. However, in 1777, David Wedderburn actually decided that he would take his appeal to the Court of Concessions in Edinburgh, and this is what he did. At the Court of Concessions in Edinburgh, Joseph Knight was actually represented by Henry Dundas, who we saw in St Andrew's Square earlier on in this episode, the Lord Advocate of Scotland, and also by James Boswell and Samuel Johnson. These men came to the defence of Joseph Knight, and they argued and presented it as, "No man is by nature the property of another." They also argued that since there was no proof that Wedderburn had ownership of Joseph Knight, and that Joseph Knight also didn't give up his freedom, that they said that he was in fact a free man. Wedderburn actually argued in the contrary. He said that his commercial interests, which underpins Scotland's prosperity, should prevail. In a huge turn of events, the case went for Joseph Knight, which was a massive achievement for them. This was because, and I quote from Lord Kames, who was the judge over this proceedings, he said that the domain assumed over this Negro under the law of Jamaica, being unjust, could not be supported in this country to any extent. That therefore the defender had no right to the Negro's service for any space of time, nor to send him out of the country against his consent. That the Negro was likewise protected under the Act 1701 from being sent out of the country against his consent. And this means that in fact that slavery was not recognised in Scots law, which is the whole country having its common law. So Joseph Knight could not be David Wedderburn's slave. Now it is very clear to me that the judge used unsavoury language when referring to Joseph Knight. However, this was a huge step in the abolition of the slave trade. Knight's act of bravery and defiance against his unjust position was the first vital steps here in Scotland for the start of a monumental change. Knight had empowered others of a similar position to break free from such rulings and become free men. Now I do state that Henry Dundas came into the defence of Joseph Knight in this case. However, during this case he was in fact a younger man. And as he got older and he realised the profitability that the transatlantic slave trade brought, He decided that he wouldn't oppose the abolition of slavery anymore, even though he believed it to be wrong in his younger years. Now I'm sat here talking to you about Henry Dundas, a man who voted against the abolition of the slave trade by about 20 years when changing the wording on the vote, when I really want to be talking about the bravery of Joseph Knight and his fight for freedom. I find it unfair to the past slaves that built the old British Empire that there's not even a single snippet or acknowledgement of the lives they paid to build our cities. Yet the man that condemned many to a life of struggle and despair is immortalised above the streets of Edinburgh. People watching this will tell me that he did great things for Scotland and the UK, but in my opinion the rights can't outweigh the wrongs. If you take a look at the commonality of the last name Campbell in Jamaica, you will see it's more common there than Edinburgh, where it originates from. Scotland will never be able to wash itself of the past, however, or the part it played, and it's done a good job of trying to hide it. But have we now not got a duty to immortalise the brave people that stood up above profits and attempted to do good? I much prefer the direction we should go in. I'm not saying pull down statues, I'm saying educate people on the horrific struggles slaves experienced to try and break down the racial barriers in our society and celebrate brave people like Joseph Knight. William Wallace was a freedom fighter, so was Joseph Knight.